Madam President and Senators, good morning. Pledge to excel through love and unity. Pledge is defined as a solemn promise or undertaking. This fourth line in the national anthem challenges Bahamians to make a sincere promise that as a people we will excel and succeed through love and unity. I am sure that as senators you have made pledges, said oaths in marriages, to take office as a senator for organizations you have joined, but have we ever paused to stop and reflect on what promises you have made, you are making, and will make for the good of our country and Bahamians everywhere? Ecclesiastes 5:5 states, "It is better not to vow than to make a vow and not fulfill it." What can you do as a senator to reveal to others your love for country and your commitment to service of your people? How can you all as senators work together to reveal to others the importance of unity and not being partisan? Do you put country above self, or are you governed by selfish motives and personal agenda? How does this fourth line in the national anthem challenge you and to be better citizens and leaders? 2 Corinthians 13:11 states, "Finally, brothers and sisters, rejoice. Strive for full restoration. Encourage one another. Be of one mind, live in peace. And the God of love and peace will be with you." Love of country is more than talk. Love is an action word that demands that we put feet, or we give feet, to the words that we speak and use. It invites each person to strive for ways and opportunities to build the other person up and to help them to see a vision where they can excel and develop to their God-given potential. This fourth line in the national anthem reminds us of our interconnectedness and that we need each other. We may have different perspectives, different ideologies, and different personalities. But as one people, we must learn to operate in love and unity. This is a commitment to seeing the other as God's children, created in His image and valuable to Him. As we seek the good of our country together, we will remember that we have all been placed in this season in the life of our country to make a positive difference as co-laborers for a better Bahamas. Daya Nada says, "Too many people in the world seem to lose sight of the importance of unity to build a future so bright. For unity truly is the stronger pillar of success to keep victory strong and bestow upon us God's best." Let us pray. Dear God, help us as a people to become one, as you and the Father are one. Forgive us for the many times where we have been divisive, selfish, and unkind. Open our eyes to recognize that our country needs all her people of every race, social strata, island, rock, and key to work in harmony for the good of Bahama land. May each of us put the things that make for hostility and war aside and become agents of peace and reconciliation. Thank you that it is possible to walk together in love and unity. We pray all these things in the precious name of Jesus Christ. Amen. Please join in the prayer of our Lord. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen.
Good morning, Senators. Today is the 27th of April, 2023, morning session. Adoption of minutes.
Morning, Madam President. Madam President, I move that the minutes of the meeting of the Senate held on Tuesday, 25th of April, 2023 be adopted.
It's been moved and seconded that the minutes of the meeting held on the 25th of April, 2023 be adopted. As many as in favor say aye. Those opposed say nay. The ayes have it. The minutes of the 25th of April, 2023 are hereby adopted. Motion for leave of absence, leave to resign. Swearing in of new senators. Communications by the President. Firstly, I want to start with thanking the woman of God who always has a message from God, a timely message from God. We thank you immensely for your time and effort of being our chaplain here at the Senate. Thank you once again, Reverend Carl Cullen. Today marks the 58th anniversary of Black Tuesday. This is a special day in Bahamian history when the late Sir Lynden Pindling, and then leader of the opposition and later Prime Minister, threw the Speaker's mace from the window, and the late Sir Milo Butler, Sr., threw the Speaker's hourglass out of the window to protest the gerrymandering of boundaries by the then governing United Bahamian Party. Theirs was a protest for a right and fair distribution of boundaries and a protest against the limitation of speaking time in the House of Assembly. Indeed, this was a seminal moment in time of Bahamian history, a tipping point, a turning point in the struggle for equality, liberation, and the many freedoms that we now enjoy. The Chair extends sincere gratitude to those brave, bold, and courageous men and women who challenged the status quo and were determined to leave the Bahamas in a better place. It's always a pleasure to have visitors in the gallery. The Senate President welcomes a young group of precocious, I think third and fourth graders from Tamale International School. Tamale International School provides a United States curriculum supplemented by British, Canadian, and Bahamian material. The school's goal is to provide a curriculum which prepares each student to perform well within a global environment. The students are accompanied by their teachers, Mrs. Smith, can you please stand? And Mrs. Higgs. The chair would be remiss if I didn't extend a special welcome to my little handsome nephew, who's intelligent, well-behaved, and is extremely well-mannered. And he's extremely excited to be here today. Can little Micah Baston please stand? Micah, Auntie is aware that your birthday is tomorrow and that you're turning the big 9. So I'd like to extend happy birthday to you for tomorrow and wish you a beautiful day. I have a small token for your birthday, and also included in the gift card will be a card that will be signed by all of the senators. So I hope that you will hold that special and dear. Pardon me? I'm getting some new nephews. So Micah, happy birthday to you. May God continue to bless and keep you. And I also, while the introductions were being made, I also realized that I have a cousin in the class, Camden Wells. Can you please stand? Camden is my close little cousin on the Longley side from Lisbon Creek, South. So it's a pleasure to have you. You're doing exceptionally well in school. Very proud of you. And I want you to be that big swimmer like your big brother, okay? Or do even better than him. Thank you so much for coming. And so at this time, I'd like for all of the students to please stand so that they can receive a welcome from the Senate. Thank you all for coming. As you leave the Senate building, I invite you on this anniversary of the 50th anniversary of Black Tuesday to take a tour of the House of Assembly and to actually see the window where the mace was thrown out of and to actually see the mace. Now, a little history about the mace is not, the mace that was thrown out was actually repaired. So you'll see a very good replica of the mace that was thrown out of the window. So I invite you to take that tour. And once again, thank you all so much for coming to the Senate today. The chair also, why are they moving? Huh? No, I don't want this. It's so supposed to leave. Right? Then come back. Huh? They look confused. Huh? Yeah. What, bring them back in or what? Yeah, let them come back in. I don't feel it. Yeah, let them come back in. Okay. The chair also welcomes to the gallery Sergeant Kevin Major. Sergeant Kevin Major has been on the Royal Bahamas Police Force for the last 23 years. And she serves with quite distinction, excellence, determination. She's a Renaissance woman with many talents and hats. She's the Bahamas International Drill Team founder and president since 2012. She's also a member and a senior pastor at Discipleship Outreach Kingdom. And she has an excellent outreach with young girls throughout the Bahamas. She's also the senior pastor there, and she pastored the late Trevanika Thompson. So I would like to welcome Sergeant Kevin Major to the balcony, to the gallery. And with her is Miss Johnson, Hendrinique Johnson, who is the Bahamas International Drill Team Assistant President, and also Ms. Raquel Rolls of the Bahamas International Drill Team Assistant and Secretary. Sergeant Kevin Major, did you stand? Thank you so much. I also hasten to add that she is the first female drum major for the Royal Bahamas Police Force, and she is presently attached to the Urban Renewal and doing an excellent job there. And I just want to publicly thank you for your service. Thank you so much. Thank you. And did the other two ladies who were with you, Ms. Johnson and Ms. Rose, did they stand? They stood. Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much. The chair extends condolences to the family of the late Kelvin Cunningham Casey, who was a noted attorney, and we are grateful for her service and contribution to the legal profession. Condolences are also extended to the families of Allison and Trevanika Thompson. Last Friday, I attended a prayer candlelight vigil to honor the life of Trevanika and Allison Thompson. And there I extended my sincere condolences to the family on behalf of the Senate body. The chair extends condolences to Anna Strawn and family, who lost her daughter, Yanika Strawn, I personally spoke with the mother yesterday and reassured her of our thoughts and prayerful support. And furthermore, heartfelt condolences are also extended to all of the families, especially those who lost their loved ones due to violence. And finally, I want to thank each and every one of you again for visiting the gallery today, and I hope that you leave a little bit more enlightened and informed. May God continue to bless the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. I thank you. And I hereby table the President's communication. Messages from the Governor General. Messages from the House of Assembly. Laying of documents by ministers. Laying of documents by ministers.
There are none, Madam President.
Communications by the ministers. Communications by senators. Questions. Answers to questions. Presentations of petitions. Appointment of select committees. Reports of committees. First reading of bills.
Madam President, I beg leave to introduce and have read for the first time a bill for act to provide for the office of Ombudsman.
Is there a seconder? Second. Or that the bill be brought up? Or that the bill do lie on the table? It is moved and second that the following bill be read a first time and table. A bill for an act to provide for the office of Ombudsman. As many as in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say nay. The ayes have it. The motion is carried. Ordered that the bill be read for a first time.
A bill for an act to provide for the office of Ombudsman.
Further first reading of bills. Second reading of bills. The chair recognizes Senator the Honorable Michael Halkitis.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, before I move for a second reading and committal of a bill for an act to amend the Central Bank Act, I would just like to join you in welcoming all of the guests who are seated in the gallery. We note the presence of the school children and as well the pastor and long-serving police officer Sergeant Major and her team. And we welcome you particularly to the young students on this day as we recognize and commemorate the 58-year anniversary of Black Tuesday, when the mace, which signifies the power of the Speaker and of the House, followed by the hourglass, were thrown out of the window of the House of Assembly, and as Sir Lyndon Pinling, then Leader of the Opposition and later Prime Minister, said, this power belongs to the people, and the people are outside in the square, and so the mace was thrown out to be amongst the people, power to the people. Interestingly, as I was walking in, one of the teachers, Mrs. Basin, asked me, she said, one of the youngsters asked, is the window still broken? And I said, well, no, the window actually, someone opened the window. So it could be thrown out. The window was opened so it could be thrown out. And it was in protest of something called, protest, as the president said, against the gerrymandering of the boundaries, of the constituency boundaries. And I'll give you a quick 1 minute rundown. Because they're students. We are here in the Senate, and we welcome you. And our legislature It's a big word. We have what we call a bicameral legislature, meaning we have two houses. We have the House of Assembly, which is right across the square, and we have the Senate. And so bills and legislation is debated in the House of Assembly. It's passed, it comes to the Senate, and we debate it, which we'll be doing here today with the Central Bank Act, which was debated in the House of Assembly on Monday, and we will pass it, and then it goes on to the Governor General, and then it becomes law. The members of the House of Assembly are elected, and they're elected to represent constituencies. Constituencies are the division of the map, the boundaries amongst the population. And by our law, they're supposed to be more or less equal number and represent basically consistent geography. And so when it comes to gerrymandering is when government is accused of drawing the boundaries, not strictly for geographic reasons, but trying to draw it to get an advantage by including their supporters in the boundaries so that they can have an advantage in winning the seat. And it's very interesting, the word gerrymandering. It's two words. It's the combination of two words named after a former governor way back in 1812 in the state of Massachusetts who was accused, his name was Elbridge Gerry, and he was accused of drawing boundaries to get an advantage. And they made fun of it, they said, because he drew the boundary so funny that it resembled a salamander, which is a type of lizard, I guess. And so hence the two words gerrymander, meaning drawing the boundaries to get an advantage. And so the protest on Black Tuesday was a protest against allegations of the government at the time drawing boundaries to get an advantage, an unfair advantage, and so that the election did not truly represent the wishes of the people. And that was 1965, 58 years ago. And then, as you know from your civics, following two short years later, we had majority rule in 1967. And so that is a bit of a history, a lesson, and so the whole purpose of Black Tuesday and why it's so important, because it started or accelerated a movement where one person, one vote truly counted, and there was no advantage in terms of, or no disadvantage to certain people who didn't have means or to women who got the vote in 1962, but truly one vote had equal voice, and there was no undue manipulation of the boundaries. And so that is Black Tuesday. And so we welcome you here today, students, and it's always very nice to have students, particularly the primary school students, because I think it encourages senators to be on their best behavior, Madam President, and it's an opportunity as well to be able to demonstrate in a very, very real and personal way how your government works. And I always say, hopefully, like my former colleague used to say, in the not too distant tomorrow, we will see some of you standing and sitting in this place, serving your country in this way. And so, once again, welcome. Madam President, thank you very much for recognizing me. I rise to move second reading and committal of a bill for an act to amend the Central Bank Act. And, Madam President, these amendments that we will address today address three issues. Firstly, it is intended to remove doubt as to the central bank's ability under the Central Bank Act to allow the government acting through the Minister of Finance to access their special drawing rights as allocated by the International Monetary Fund. Another amendment seeks to reduce the percentage of loans that the central bank may advance to the government of the Bahamas from its current level of 30% to 15.5% of average earnings and average annual revenue. And it will adjust the way that be seeking to adjust the way that the central bank participates in the market for government securities. And so the central bank will no longer participate in the primary market, meaning when the government securities are first out to market, the central bank will no longer participate in that primary market, but they will be able to participate in the secondary market, meaning when those securities have been issued and they are bought and sold, the central bank will be able to participate in that way. Most of the focus, Madam President, has been on the issue of the allocation to the government of the Bahamas by the IMF of special drawing rights back in August 2021 as part of a large general allocation. And I suspect that today this debate will focus mostly on that issue as well. And so I will speak to that first and then speak to the other two issues. Madam President, since August 1973, the Bahamas has been a member of the International Monetary Fund, an organization that aims to promote sustainable growth and prosperity for all of its 190 member countries. The IMF aims to achieve this, that is sustainable growth and prosperity, by advocating for economic policies that facilitate financial stability and monetary cooperation, both of which are essential for increasing productivity, generating employment opportunities, and enhancing overall economic well-being. By endorsing these policies, the IMF provides critical support to its member countries, including the Bahamas. The IMF has three key areas of involvement in the Bahamas that promote financial stability. These include providing guidance on policy matters, offering financial assistance, and facilitating capacity development, that is also known as the transfer of knowledge. And a crucial duty, Madam President, of the IMF is to observe and assess the economic and financial practices of the Bahamas and provide guidance on policy matters. And so, for example, the IMF conducts every year what they call an Article 4 consultation, where a team dedicated to the IMF, to the Bahamas, a team from the IMF, will come to the Bahamas, study the economy, look at the performance of the economy. Before they come on the Article 4 visit, they have what they call a staff visit, which they concluded about 3 weeks ago. Where it's a pre-visit where they come and they have meetings with the government, private sector, and they give you a preliminary assessment of what they think are the prospects for the economy. And through discussion, they would, the government of the Bahamas would say to them, here are some critical issues that we would like for you to examine when you come with your full team with the Article 4. So if there are issues that the government would like to have examined by the experts, we would say to them. And I can say, for example, that following the staff visit, in our discussions with them, one of the things we want to look at is how we mobilize more private sector capital in the economy. That is, increase the amount of bank lending. You know, there's always there's this discussion about the banks having a lot of this excess liquidity and difficulty in accessing credit. And so we said, let's look at that, what can we do to help to mobilize more private sector credit? And let's take a look at our labor markets and how our labor markets are functioning. There have been certain developments over the past few years, that we want to look at the labor markets and see how our benefits are evolving, et cetera. And so when we talk about guidance on policy matters, they come and they give you suggestions. Now, sometimes a lot of their suggestions are of the textbook variety, meaning they would say, okay, according to economic theory, this is what you're supposed to do. And we sit with them and we say, yes, thank you very much. We understand that, and we'll take that, and we will mix that in with our own unique circumstances here in the Bahamas, and then we will develop the policy. And so, Madam President, in providing guidance, the IMF identifies potential risks and recommends appropriate measures to foster economic development and promote financial stability. And we maintain with the IMF an ongoing dialogue with the government to assess economic circumstances and propose policies that promote enduring growth. Capacity development is a crucial component of the IMF's operations, in which they provide technical assistance and training to the Bahamas. This program is tailored to meet the specific needs of the country and covers a range of areas such as tax collection, public finances, monetary and exchange rate policies, legal systems, and governance. And the IMF allocates a significant portion of its yearly expenses towards capacity development, which is available upon request. And through in-person meetings, remote communication, and the deployment of advisors, the IMF assists the country with gathering and sharing data to facilitate decision-making. And so throughout the years, the government of the Bahamas, various administrations have been the recipient of technical support from the various departments within the IMF, including fiscal affairs, legal and monetary, capital markets, and statistics. Regionally, the IMF's Institute for Capacity Development and the Caribbean Regional Technical Assistance Center, CARTAC, have provided significant support through the Bahamas through their technical expertise. CARTAC is the regional arm of the IMF, and they were very, very instrumental when we were implementing the VAT to the point of embedding some consultants during the process and after to make sure that we had a smooth implementation. So over the years, the largely the interaction for the Bahamas and the IMF has been in the area of technical assistance, advice, assistance with developing policy. But of course, Madam President, the IMF also provides financial support when member countries are hit by crises in order to create breathing room for the impacted country as policies that restore economic stability and growth are implemented. And the fund also provides precautionary financing to help prevent crises. So you would know that in certain countries, even in the Caribbean, Jamaica, Barbados, and others have gone into IMF programs where they are mandated to implement certain reforms in order to access financing to reform and make changes to the economy that will promote growth. Sometimes those reforms are painful, and so that is why countries, by and large, if they can avoid it, they would avoid going to the IMF because, the funding tends to come with, when you enter into an IMF program, the funding tends to come with conditions. Normally, things like reduce the size of your public sector, privatize, those sorts of things, to lessen government spending, also involves normally increased taxation. So in a nutshell, that is what the IMF does. That has been our interaction with them over the years. In the area of precautionary financing, Madam President, we come to the issue of the special drawing rights. And over the last day or two between the House and I guess what we'll have here today, I think the public will get a nice tutorial on this sort of esoteric and issue of special drawing rights. So that's part of our mandate, I guess, to Madam President, to educate. So we've spoken about this a lot, but it's interesting. In 1969, Madam President, the IMF established the special drawing rights, which is an interest-bearing international reserve assets that complements other reserve assets held by member countries. And so, Madam President, simply put, this gives the IMF the ability to make resources available to countries who might not yet enter into an IMF program, but it shores up their finances, particularly in the area of reserves. And so the allocation of special drawing rights is exclusively reserved for the IMF member countries who have chosen to participate in the use of these special drawing rights. And presently, every member country of the IMF, all 190, have opted to be a participant, inclusive of the Bahamas. And so, Madam President, one of the questions that has come up during the debate and in the public discussion is, well, is it a loan? Is it a loan? And it's not a loan, Madam President, because it's not a loan. If you look at go to the IMF website, and they have a section called Question and Answers on Special Drawing Rights. And there's a question there, and I thought I'd read it straight from them. It says, is the SDR allocation a loan from the IMF? And this is at imf.org. And it says, this is in Questions and Answers on Special Drawing Rights. They published it on August 23rd, 2021. I think the SDR allocation was August 21st. No, at the same time, the same day that they announced the allocation of the special drawing rights, they released these frequently asked questions, and it says, this is from their site, the special drawing right SDR allocation is not a loan from the IMF. When the IMF allocates SDRs, participants in the SDR department receive unconditional liquidity represented by an interest-bearing reserve asset and a corresponding long-term liability to the SDR department, SDR allocation. Now, some people might say long-term liability is a loan, but in the eyes of the IMF, the SDR allocation is not a loan. And then they go on to talk about the cost, which we can get to later. Madam President, the IMF has the power according to its Articles of Agreement to generate unconditional liquidity by issuing general allocations of special drawing rights to its member countries. And so far to date, since 1969, the IMF has allocated a total of $935.7 billion. That's 9 zeros, students. $935.7 billion, including 4 general allocations and a one-time special allocation. Madam President, in August 2021, the International Monetary Fund distributed $650 billion in special drawing rights to help member countries tackle economic challenges caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. And so here you have the IMF, whose responsibility is to promote financial stability around the world, seeing the impact that the COVID-19 pandemic has had on the economies of countries around the world. In response, they issued $650 billion worth of special drawing rights to help assist countries coping with the fallout of the COVID-19 pandemic. And here is what they say in the press release dated August 23rd, 2021. I think this is important, Madam President, because it sort of lays the groundwork. I hope the students are still awake. So on August 23rd, 2021, in this press release that I printed off from the IMF website, it says, IMF Managing Director announces the $650 billion SDR allocation. It says, and comes into effect. And it says, Washington, D.C., August 23rd, 2021. Mrs. Kristalina Georgieva, Managing Director of the International Monetary Fund, made the following statement today. I quote, the largest allocation of special drawing rights in history, about $650 billion worth, comes into effect today. The allocation is a significant shot in the arm for the world and, if used wisely, a unique opportunity to combat this unprecedented crisis. The SDR allocation will provide additional liquidity to the global economic system, supplementing countries' foreign exchange reserves and reducing their reliance on more expensive domestic or external debt. Countries can use the space provided by the SDR allocation to support their economies and step up their fight against the crisis. SDRs are being distributed to countries in proportion to their quota shares in the IMF. This means about $275 billion is going to emerging and developing countries, of which low-income countries will receive about $21 billion, equivalent to as much as 6% of GDP in some cases. It goes on, SDRs are a precious resource and the decision on how best to use them rests with our member countries. For SDRs to be deployed for the maximum benefit of member countries and the global economy, these decisions should be prudent and well informed. To support countries and help ensure transparency and accountability, the IMF is providing a framework for assessing the macroeconomic implications of the new allocations, its statistical treatment and governance, and how it might affect debt sustainability. The IMF would also provide regular updates on all SDR holdings, transactions, and trading, including a follow-up report on the use of SDRs in 2 years' time. So that should be coming forth soon. They go on to say to encourage countries who might not need to use them to reallocate them to other countries who might need them more. So it says, to magnify the benefits of this allocation, the IMF is encouraging voluntary channeling of some SDRs from countries with strong external positions to countries most in need. And over the past 16 months, some members have already pledged to lend 24 billion, including 15 billion from the existing SDRs, to the IMF's Poverty Reduction and Growth Trust, which provides concessional loans to low-income countries. And this is just a start, and the IMF will continue to work with our members to build up this effort. And it goes on, it says, this is important as well, the IMF is also engaging with its member countries on the possibility of a new resilience and sustainability trust, which has been established, which could use channeled SDRs to help the most vulnerable countries with structural transformation, including confronting climate-related challenges. And another possibility could be to challenge SDRs to support lending by multilateral development agencies. And finally, it says this SDR allocation is a critical component of the IMF's broader effort to support countries through the pandemic, which includes 117 billion in new financing for 85 countries, debt service relief for 29 low-income countries, and policy advice and capacity development support for 175 countries to help restore a strong and sustainable recovery. So in issuing the SDRs, $650 billion worth worldwide, the IMF said, importantly, that countries, SDR will provide additional liquidity to the global economic system, supplementing exchange rate reserves and reducing their reliance on more expensive domestic or external debt. And so that was the IMF in releasing the SDR. Huh? Yes, I can do that. I'll do that. I can table this. That is the release. And so, Madam President, that was the IMF basically saying we are stepping up to the plate to provide some assistance in this time of unprecedented crisis. Provision of these unconditional reserves aid countries with limited liquidity and helps to manage the impact of the pandemic by reducing the need for distortionary policies and enabling more counter-cyclical responses. And what that means for the students is if the economy is down and doing poorly, in economics, counter-cyclical policy means that if the economy is down, then the government can step in and invest some money, spend some money in things like construction, work on infrastructure, things that will create and increase economic activity. And so part of it is to give countries room when they were in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic, having had to borrow money to do that and increase expenditure on things like healthcare services. This would help governments be able to respond in that way. Additionally, it allows for spending on crisis response efforts to protect vulnerable populations and prevent long-term damage, particularly the poor. Madam President, the Bahamas as a member country received a share of these SDRs, which by design can be used for debt management or rebuilding external reserves based on the country's priorities. It was left to the various governments to decide how to use this issuance of SDRs. The IMF set no precondition on the use of the SDRs. At the time that the SDRs were allocated to the Bahamas, Madam President, the central bank indicated that they would be used to shore up the reserve. Madam President, for the Bahamas, the Central Bank Act as it is currently written, and that is why we're seeking to amend today, does not speak to the specific manner with which the IMF issued SDRs. The central bank placed the SDRs in its reserve, which was consistent with past practice for the allocation of SDRs, but this treatment meant that, according as the law is written, that access to these SDRs could only happen through the central bank lending to the government. And so, Madam President, it remains the government's view that access to this allocation of SDR should not constitute a loan from the central bank, as there were no preconditions set by the issuer of the IMF. The central bank is the government's fiscal agent and could have accepted the SDRs, for example, and placed them in an account for the government's use and not into reserves. That option existed. At the time, the decision was to place them into the reserve. But nonetheless, Madam President, for the avoidance of doubt, given the public statements by the central bank on its original treatment of the SDRs, the government have agreed amendments to the Central Bank Act aimed to formalize existing terms of the Memorandum of Understanding and update the Act to align with the IMF's guidelines. And further, the proposed changes aim to ensure accurate categorization of the SDR transaction. So simply put, Madam President, got the government of the Bahamas got the SDRs from the IMF, who said you can use them to help mitigate against COVID-19 impact. If you want to use it for debt management, you can. If you want to use it for countercyclical policy, or your spending that is related to your increased expenses for COVID-19, you can. Simply put, the Act, the Central Bank of the Bahamas Act, as it is currently written, treat that allocation as a loan. And so what we said was, we don't think it's a loan, we don't agree it's a loan, but in the opinion of the central bank, in their strict reading of the Act, they think it does, and that's the only way that they can treat it. And so what we're saying is, for the avoidance of doubt, we'll do this amendment. Now, Madam President, it has been raised that it should have been done before, and that you should have done it before you had access to it. That's a difference of opinion, Madam President. As we said, in the opinion of the Ministry of Finance and its advisors, it is not a loan. There was no need. We were within, the government was within its rights to access the SDRs. Legal advice gotten by the central bank had a difference of opinion, which is not unusual. And so we said, okay, for the avoidance of doubt, we'll amend it, and then so there's no issue and no question and no disagreement. And so the proposed Central Bank of the Bahamas Amendment Bill 2023 includes a new section that would allow the minister to access and use the special drawing rights given by the International Monetary Fund. And this would be done with the aim of managing the country's foreign currency debt operations and reducing its foreign currency debt obligations. What that means simply, Madam President, is we have a debt in foreign currency, mostly US dollars, and this would help us to manage that debt. Again, Madam President, we believe that there's a misconception that the Bahamas' use of the special drawing rights was equivalent to borrowing or printing money. However, we believe that this position is incorrect, and the government is not borrowing funds from the central bank or creating new currency. Instead, the government is employing resources provided by the International Monetary Fund as specified in the IMF guidelines regarding the handling and utilization of the SDRs. At the same time that the SDR allocations were issued, Madam President, that is August 2021, the IMF issued a book, Guidance Notes for Fund Staff on the Treatment and Use of the SDR Allocation. So what it is basically a manual for use by the IMF staff when they come to advise countries on how to use the SDRs. And I'll read from one portion of it. Actually, it's Guidance Note 9. I'll just read it, Madam President, again, to when we talk about how it is used. And this, as I said, Madam President, there are 190 member countries who are participating in this program. who are participating in special drawing rights program. And so these guidance notes are meant to be very broad and to be able to apply to the various circumstances of the different countries. So you'd read the guidance notes and apply it to your individual circumstances as a country. And it says in Guidance Note 9, the Articles of Agreement do not prescribe the institutional arrangements for holding SDRs by members, including specific accounting treatment of SDR allocations. Members are thus not obliged under the Articles to hold SDRs under specific institutional arrangements, nor to follow a specific accounting framework or methodology. And institutional arrangements and institutional arrangements differ widely. Regardless of the domestic institutional arrangements for holding SDRs and the specific accounting treatment followed by members of the entity that acts as the member's fiscal agent, from the perspective of the SDR department and the fund, the obligations and rights arising under the Articles of Agreement from members participating in the SDR department, including those related to the use of SDR allocations, are obligations and rights of the relevant member and not the fiscal agent or other entity of the member involved in managing a member's SDR position. So the rights, the obligations of these SDRs are those of the member, which is the Bahamas. So they belong to the government. And I think there was, in some public pronouncements, an assertion perhaps that these assets belong to the central bank and the government is taking them or borrowing them. The IMF said in its guidance note, unequivocally, they belong to the member, the Bahamas government. And so those guidance notes were written in those guidance notes again, and in the general statement when it speaks about the questions, it talks about how can you use them. And in the press statement that I laid, how can you use them? And you can use them for debt management, you can use them for spending, you can use them. The aim is to help countries cope with the COVID-19 pandemic. Madam President, in that regard, these funds have been used precisely as envisaged by the IMF to retire foreign currency debt. The debt which was retired included a bilateral bank loan that could not have been refinanced at reasonable rates given the global market conditions. So, Madam President, we had a loan coming up for refinancing, $180 million that matured on the 12th of December, 2022. It carried an interest rate which was, I'm going to get too technical, 3-month LIBOR plus a spread. So the interest rate was 7.75% on that loan. And our plan was that we would refinance this loan. Now, the public would be aware that over the past several months, the U.S. Federal Reserve have been raising interest rates very rapidly to combat inflation. There's inflation in the U.S., inflation here. I hear about it all the time. When people ask what the government is doing about inflation in the U.S. The U.S. Federal Reserve raising interest rates. They were very aggressive in raising interest rates. So at December, when it came time to refinance the loan, the LIBOR rate had increased from 1.216% in June of 2022 to 4.067% by December 2022. And so when you add the spread on top of that, you would go from an interest rate of, let's say you were paying 7.75%, as the interest rates rose, at the end of December, you're looking at LIBOR at 4.067%. If you add another 4% on top of that, so you're looking at about 8%, 8.5% minimum. And when you speak about then banks' projections on what interest rates would be, then so when you go to the bank in December and say, I want to refinance this loan, interest rates have already risen, risk has risen. You have the situation of some of the mini bank crises that are going on in the U.S. And so what you were facing was the prospect of either refinancing this loan to the tune of perhaps about 10% or more, or utilizing these SDRs that you have available to you to refinance that loan, Madam President. So so when we look at those circumstances, rising interest rates, particularly when we call the emerging markets, rates that are available to countries like the Bahamas, this reinforced the obligation of the government to seek to contain borrowing costs to the extent possible. And so the receipt of the SDRs in 2019 was intended to assist with both fiscal and monetary policy initiatives, and in the context of the challenges caused by COVID-19. And so as contemplated, the uses included debt management as well as external reserves rebuilding, and allowed for us to use it to assist, and that was the major component of it, refinancing that loan. And so we had this by the bilateral loan, $180 million with JP Morgan. Around at the time that we made use of the SDRs, the interest rate attributed to them were in the range of 2.88% at the end of December 2022. And so if you look at the possibility of having to refinance at 10% or more on the one hand, and having these funds available to you at 2.88%, let's say 3%, so the interest savings on that transaction is about $13 million per year. Or if you look at it over a 10-year period, $130 million savings on the interest. And so we believe that this use of SDRs serves as a further demonstration of prudent fiscal management, Madam President. I'm sorry, Mr. Vice President. And I could end there. I mean, 3% versus 10, 11%. I think I can sit down. But there's just a couple more points I want to make, Madam President. And so the facts, as I laid it out, I believe, Mr. Vice President, surrounding the allocation of the special drawing rights by the IMF clearly demonstrates, in our opinion, that it should not be misconstrued as a loan by the central bank. Rather, it is a bestowal of unconditional liquidity in the form of an interest-bearing reserve asset by the IMF to the member government. And this approach represents a credible strategy for enhancing financial stability and promoting sustainable economic growth. Mr. Vice President, it is important to note that this SDR allocation do not involve any contribution from member countries' budget, and I want to stress the point that the allocation of special drawing rights is a financially advantageous decision that requires no contributions from member countries. It is not foreign aid, but rather a reserve asset, and the most significant advantage of SDR allocation is it does not increase any country's public debt burden. Therefore, allocating SDRs is a fiscally responsible and effective means of promoting economic stability. Mr. Vice President, before I sit, I just want to elaborate a bit on the point of the debt management and why we think it was a prudent use of resources to be able to use these resources at 2.88% as opposed to trying to go to the market where you would attract 10, 12% based on, as I indicated, the increasing levels of interest rates in the U.S. And when you get as you know, there's talk of recession and crises, et cetera, there's normally what we call a flight to safety, meaning people with more investors look at things like U.S. government treasuries and very, very safe investments. And so for all the emerging countries, including the Bahamas, their interest costs would go up because we all considered when people think that there's going to be turmoil, they flee to safety. And so interest rates for all the developing countries like us go up. So in December, facing this refinancing, you can go to the market, pay double digits, or use these assets that were quite rightfully the assets of the government of the Bahamas being held for it by its agent, by its fiscal agent, the central bank. And so we felt that that was a prudent use of resources, and that any sort of difference on interpretation of the use, we held our opinion, the central bank got its opinion, and so we're here to remove all doubt by making this amendment to specifically and explicitly put in the act how SDRs are to be handled. Two more points, Mr. Vice President, before I take my seat, and it relates to the external reserves. Because at the time that the SDRs were issued, the central bank used them to help the reserves. And I would just like to say, Mr. President, Mr. Vice President, that the use of the reserve have in no way negatively impacted, in my opinion, the reserves. At the end of 2022, our external reserves stood at, following the use of the SDR, stood at $2.5 billion. That is, in 2019, before, like right after Dorian, but before the COVID-19 pandemic, the reserves stood at $1.7 billion. In 2021, the SDR position at the central bank was $418 million, and the reserves were $2.4 billion. At the end of 2022, the SDRs were $139 million, but the reserves were $2.5 billion. So the reserves actually went up after the government used the SDRs. So the use of the SDRs did not negatively impact the reserve positions. As a matter of fact, reserves went up. Yes. Right? And the real economy, like they say. So $2.5 billion is an all-time high. As a matter of fact, it's so high that we have to ways to make sure that some of that money gets out into the economy. The last point I want to make, just to drive home once again the point how important it is in terms of managing the debt and trying to get the lowest cost that you can. And when you have a situation in front of you where you can get this low interest, you do it in the interest of the people. National debt, Mr. Vice President, in 2019 was $8.4 billion. By the end of 2021, in 2019, $8.4 billion. By the end of 2021, it was $10.7 billion. And by the end of 2022, $11.4 billion. And so $3 billion increase from pre-pandemic to the end of 2022. And if we look at the debt service, what we pay in interest and charges, just interest on the debt, Madam President, Mr. Vice President, we're paying on the interest, and I'll do a couple of years to show that. I'm talking about across administrations. 2019 to 2020, we were paying $345 million per year in interest, talking about interest and charges. 2020, 2021, $422 million. 21-22, $512 million. And this year we budgeted to pay $588 million in interest. And so, again, a national response to COVID-19 was in order to protect the vulnerable and provide assistance and do all the things we needed to do as a nation. Of course, we had to raise the debt. What comes with that is an increase in interest. And so we're paying, over $200 million more just in interest than we did just 3-4 short years ago, Mr. 243 million, actually, 3 short years ago. And so what I'm saying is, in the face of that, it is incumbent upon any government, when it comes, you have a loan maturing, you have an opportunity to use an asset that is yours, to refinance that at a much lower rate and realize those savings that can then be challenged into, channeled into other things. You do it, Mr. Vice President, I submit. And where there's a difference of opinion on the handling, you talk it out. If you cannot come to an agreement on the strict interpretation, then you come and you do an amendment and you make it retroactive, not because it was unlawful or you felt it was unlawful, but you just want to, as the bill says, to remove all doubt. And so we think it was a prudent use, Mr. Vice President, and we look forward, as we move forward, to continuing to work with the Central Bank and the IMF as we continue to develop good policy as we move forward and put this pandemic in the rearview mirror and go more into sustainable growth. And so that is why we're here today, Mr. Vice President, to do this amendment. And I should say, as my last point, that it is not at all unusual to have legislation amended with retroactive effect, because we can look simply at the amendment to the Central Bank Act of 2010, and the act was amended and then it had retroactive effect. I think that was related to the ownership of Balcony House, I think it was. And so it is not unusual to have something with retroactive effect, and there's nothing nefarious at all. We just think it was acting in the best interest of the country. And so, Madam President, with those few remarks, I move for second reading and committal of the bill for an act to amend the Central Bank of the Bahamas Act.
Thank you for your educational contribution, Senator the Honorable Michael Halkitis. Is there a seconder? The chair recognizes Senator the Honorable Quintin Blackburn.
Madam President, I stand here to second the Central Bank of the Bahamas Amendment Bill 2023. As always, I would love to give thanks and praise to God for allowing me to rise in this honorable place and give a contribution. But before I begin, I would like to address a major concern in our country. Many Bahamian families have felt the impact of gun violence and murders, and my family is one of them. 2 years ago, my younger cousin, Kenise Pearl Smith, was violently murdered and her body was left through a track road off of Marshall Road. And last week, Thursday, on my birthday, another cousin of mine, Jaden Miller, was murdered on Seabreeze Lane as he left to come out of a convenience store. Having to see the hurt of my family on these occasions is one that I wouldn't wish on anyone. I share the stance of many Bahamians that if someone can callously murder a person, they should face the strictest consequences of the law. No matter if the person is deemed a burden to society, because we do not want to give the proverbial message that no life or any life is valued more than another. 58 years ago today was Black Tuesday. A young mom by the age of 35 years old, and also a younger chairman of the Progressive Liberal Party, Cecil Wallace Whitfield, assisted and helped Lyndon Pinling and Mila Butler throw the mace out of Parliament because it was for, and it's always to this day, for the people. But Madam President, in regard to the Central Bank of the Bahamas Amendment Bill 2023, I was able to view the proceedings in the lower house on this bill, and there were some points raised by the opposition that were not substantiated by any data. But I hope that those points aren't raised here this morning by the side opposite. I would like to address head-on the concerns raised by the opposition in the lower house regarding our government's access to $232 million of the International Monetary Fund special drawing rights allocation and the subsequent amendment to the Central Bank Act. First and foremost, let me clarify that the SDR allocation is not alone. The IMF has explicitly outlined that the SDRs are an interest-bearing reserve asset allocated to participants to provide unconditional liquidity during challenging times. This allocation was given to countries, including ours, to alleviate funding concerns by the devastating effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. This government is committed to utilizing these funds for their legitimate and intended purpose, as prescribed by the IMF in its guidance notes. The government has taken proactive measures to amend the act. I must emphasize that this government has been transparent and accountable throughout this process. The governor of the central bank, Mr. John Roll, has confirmed our government's commitment to amending the Central Bank Act, thus allowing the utilization of the IMF SDRs held as part of the external reserves. The central bank has worked closely with the government in concluding arrangements to access these much-needed funds, ensuring that we continue to serve our people and address the challenges presented by the ongoing pandemic. We understand the importance of fiscal responsibility and adherence to the law. However, we must not lose sight of our primary goal, which is to support and uplift our nation during these unprecedented times. The Central Bank of the Bahamas is key to our nation's success. And Madam President, the International Monetary Fund is an organization that has 190 member states. And the Bahamas is one of those nations. And the special drawing rights were created by the IMF in 1969. And there have been 3 prior general allocations, the most recent of which was during the global financial crisis of 2009. That allocation was considered an important contributor to stabilizing international financial conditions. In August of 2021, in recognition that the pandemic was an enormous shock to the global economy, the IMF allocated $650 billion worth of special drawing rights. This is the largest debt-free form of support for low and middle-income countries. During the pandemic, and the intention was to help countries whose economies were devastating blows by shutdowns, in recognition that all member countries would benefit from the IMF's word, a major effort to foster the resilience and stability of our global economy. The value of the assets allocated is proportionate to a nation's IMF quota shares, which reflects a country's position within the global economy. Essentially, special drawing rights are the units by which a country's IMF share is measured. These assets can be held in their current form or converted. Countries are free to hold special drawing rights as part of their foreign exchange reserve or to use them to bolster government's finances to service debt. The goal of SDRs, is to provide a liquidity boost without raising debt burdens. These assets are not loans, and I repeat, these are not loans. Access to these assets is facilitated through a voluntary arrangement between the IMF and member countries during the time of global and financial economic difficulty. This is not an IMF loan, as I repeat once again. It is an automatically allocated reserve that does not generate debt, does not require repayment to the IMF, and does not come with the conditions associated with IMF loan facilities. As we all know, the worst of the pandemic is now in the rearview mirror, but the economic harm caused by the shutdowns is still with us today. Opening the economy quickly and ending curfews was crucial, but recovery is a big job, and utilizing SDRs is another tool for rebuilding and strengthening our fiscal position. But of course, the side opposite would say, this is a loan, and it's not free money. The interest rate associated with special drawing rights is 0.05%, far below market rates. We have discretion as an IMF member state to utilize these assets for our national benefit. This amendment ensures that our laws align with our national priorities and needs as a government. This is not only the opinion of the government of the Bahamas, but the IMF itself has supported the assertion that the special drawing rights are intended to be accessed by governments and are not solely owned by the Central Bank of the Bahamas. During the pandemic, global economies had shut down, and these special drawing rights were intended to provide the necessary boost to keep the global economy afloat. Initially, our primary need was to maintain our levels of foreign reserves. It was in August of 2021 that the Central Bank of the Bahamas had gained access to special drawing rights valued at $247.5 million held as international reserves. The funds served their immediate purpose, but over time, this administration oversaw the nation's economic recovery. our needs as a government changed. The bill before us today allows us to adapt the use of these resources to reflect our evolving national priorities. In this instance, we are specifically addressing foreign currency debts in amending the Central Bank Act to allow the government to access its special drawing rights. We are preserving the intended function of these resources as designated by the IMF, with full anticipation that governments would have access to these funds and would be able to use them based on a country-specific need. I am hopeful that the side opposite doesn't mischaracterize important matters such as these and oppose for opposing's sake. That would be irresponsible. And it's unnecessary because this bill is uncontroversial. These resources are intended to be used by governments to cushion the shocks and aftershocks from the pandemic. The IMF clearly supports the use of these funds for debt purposes, and so does the central bank. The Central Bank of the Bahamas has gone on record to state that they are cooperating with the government on this amendment. Madam President, the government is using these reserves. I remember one time, Madam President, in this same house, that a member on the side opposite stated that he would not question the financial secretary because of his financial acumen. But I ask and say once again, do you dare question John Roll, the governor of the central bank?
Yes, you did. Yes, yes.
We have worked hand in hand. I want you to question him. We have worked hand in hand with the central bank to develop the legal mechanisms to properly govern or use these assets. As we all have our repayment terms, these are favorable terms that could only be achieved through the use of special drawing rights. But ultimately, it simply makes sense to use the resources on hand to service foreign debt obligations rather than to incur additional debt. Within the past 2 years, 98 countries have used special drawing rights in response to the economic downturn associated with the pandemic. Of these 98 countries, 55 have used special drawing rights for IMF debt relief. 55 countries, Madam President. There's no controversy here, just a government doing what governments are supposed to do, taking advantage of an important resource for its people. I am confident that the government has acted in the best interest of the Bahamian people and the fiscal health of this nation. Madam President, I confidently and firmly support and second the Central Bank of the Bahamas Bill 2023. Thank you.
It has been moved and seconded that the following bill be read for a second time and committed. A bill for an act to amend the Central Bank of the Bahamas Act. As many? The chair recognizes Senator the Honorable Maxine Seymour. I forgot to thank Senator Quintin Libran for your contribution. Thank you, Senator Libran. Chair recognizes Senator the Honorable Maxine Seymour.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I give thanks to God for this opportunity to be here, and of course to the Leader of the Opposition, by whose pleasure I serve. I too would like to welcome the students from Tamale who visited with us today here in the Senate, and tour as well, the House of Assembly. And I'd also like to recognize the anniversary of Black Tuesday, and I'm very happy that that came up because this is a great opportunity to caution the New Day government to avoid gerrymandering at any cause, and to also affirm in our democracy the position of the opposition and its leader in holding the government accountable whenever they're acting in contrary to what is best for the people of this country. And so Black Tuesday is a great lesson in both of those ways, and so I look forward to seeing the constituencies for the next election, because I'm sure that the party who stood against gerrymandering won't be partaking in any way in it. And so I look forward to that. Madam President, last evening I had an opportunity to attend the premiere of a documentary called Two-Faced: Gender Inequality in the Bahamas, which is described as an independent documentary film focused on the impact of gender inequality in our country. And at this time, I'd like to congratulate Gina Rogers-Seeley, the producer, and her team for taking a real in-depth look into the issue. And I'd also like to note that I did see you there, attending, supporting the cause. I'd also like to extend sympathy to the family of Mr. Clarence Gibson, who was funeralized last weekend in Gregorytown, Eleuthera. Mr. Gibson was a devout churchman at the Anglican Church and a member of the Gregorytown Community Band. He worked as a contractor, and he was very proud of his wife, 4 sons, and 4 daughters. I'd also like to extend sympathy to Sam Hall, who's the brother of former President Mildred Hall Watson and Jenny Hall Campbell. Likewise, I'd like to extend sympathy on the passing of Doris Smith, who died at 101 years old this week in West Grand Bahama. She was the matriarch of that community, and I would like to extend sympathy to her family. Then finally, I would like to extend sympathy to all the families who are grieving the loss of loved ones, especially those directly impacted by violent crimes. You know, Madam President, I keep saying that we have to find a way to memorialize victims, and whether it's digital or otherwise, because they're not just numbers for those diligently keeping track of the count. These are people who've passed away. They're human beings, family members, working persons involved in the community, and we really have to find a way to remember those who are just, taken away, some would say prematurely, especially by crime. Madam President, semantics are a funny thing. If you go to a friend and you say, lend me a slow 100, right? You might say, lend me a slow 100, and I might really go to the good senator here, and ask for that. So you might say, lend me a slow 100. Or, Madam President, you might say, let me hold on 100 till payday. Or you might say, you ain't got a slow 100. I could give it back to you. The point is, you can call it what you may. But if you get the funds from a relative friend or whoever you get it from, and the person says, no worries, keep it, you ain't got to worry about giving it to me back, then that I say is a gift. That means that's yours. You ain't never got to worry again who you get that from, where you get it, when you get it. But if you have to give it back, Madam President, I call it a loan. Now, you could say it's debt, you could say it's liability, you could call it whatever you want to call it, whatever word works best for us. That's why they create thesauruses, because everyone gets to choose a word that they prefer to use. And so you could call it whatever you want to call it. Now, your friend might say, you ain't got to rush to give it back to me. Graduate college first, get your first job, then you could pay me back. Or they might say, listen, give it to me $1 every month for the next 100 months. However they decide they want it back, if they want it back, I call it a loan, Madam President. And so the reality is that we understand from our Professor Senator who did an excellent job at educating us on gerrymandering, and then went on to educate us on the IMF and, drawing rights and special drawing rights. And I really appreciate him, and I've learned so much from him. But the reality is, Madam President, is that as part of the central bank amendment bill that we have here today, the Davis administration is simply, in my opinion, seeking to legalize and legitimize a fundamentally unlawful act. Now, such an act will not be endorsed or supported by this side. Today's discussion regards an amendment to the Central Bank Act, which would not be here had it not been for the illegal use of these funds. Now, yes, the IMF gave it and said, oh, do what you may, but the IMF always expects us to follow the local law, and that's just the reality. And so this administration, Madam President, continues to create a detrimental pattern of financial misconduct. And now we're trying to legalize it, and worse off, trying to implicate us in their wrongdoings. As the minister pointed out, a lot of the story starts with 2021, when the Bahamas received 247 million SDR allocation to bolster external reserves. Now, that was announced in August 2021, just 1 month before the election. Now, at that time, the Central Bank of the Bahamas, who we all trust and know and respect and love, they reported publicly and communicated to the Ministry of Finance that Central Bank was clear. They were very clear that the SDRs will be used for foreign reserve management operations, in particular for any increase in foreign exchange needs expressed by the private and public sector. They were clear, Madam President, that the Bahamas' SDR allocations are not earmarked for lending to the government, and that they do not increase the central bank's ability to lend to the government. The lending limits remain fixed by law. However, these allocations, made it better able for central bank to relax remaining foreign currency conservation measures. And so under Section 21 of the Central Bank Act, Madam President, the bank may only offer short-term loans and advances, direct and indirect, to the government, subject to prevailing market interest rates for a period not exceeding 91 days. And we all understand what that is. If you're going to give someone something, you have the central bank, the law is clear. It's only a certain amount you could give them, the interest rate is clear, and they could only have it outstanding for a certain length of time. That's very clear. The law is clear, Madam President. And no government may commit to a debt or liability that is not supported by legal parameters. And so the fact that the Prime Minister tabled the Memorandum of Understanding, it's just proof that in his capacity as Ministry of Finance, surely, in my opinion, he had to have been aware that this is just not lawful. And so to bypass the action, the proposed amendment that we're here today talking about seeks to make this act legal and do so retroactively. And we've heard that this isn't odd. Well, Madam President, why don't we make retroactive some laws that really directly benefit and impact the vulnerable? If we want to give a social services increase by 10%, why don't we make that retroactive to, say, January last year, and then pay all those people 12 months that's outstanding? If we want to backdate things, if that's what we want to do, let's do it on other things. Let's just say a custom exemption comes into effect. Let's backdate that and find out all the people who brought things in within the past 5 months, and let's refund them their custom duty. Because if we could sit here and decide we're going to make a law retroactive for our convenience, then maybe we should make that a practice, especially so that it could impact the ordinary everyday behemoth. So, Madam President, here it is now. The government, they accessed this $232.8 million already, and, it's drawn down, and really and truly, they didn't even explain out front, what was so urgent, so important, that we needed to circumvent the law and access the country's external reserves in the SDRs that were held by the central bank. What was so urgent? And, just trivializing it, right? The thing is, we could say it's a difference of opinion as much as we want. But the reality is that this was an unlawful activity because the law, the Central Bank Act, is clear. And trivializing this matter, or even dealing in semantics, like I say, you could call it what you may. The point of the matter is we got to give it back. Now, you might not want to call that a loan. You might want to call it a liability. You might want to call it a, it's not really, hey, just say call it whatever. Just call it whatever. The point is it ain't ours to keep. We have to give it back. And Madam President, I call that a loan. Because if someone give me some money and they want it back, I could say, I don't really consider that a loan because the actual loan I have at the bank is a loan. I could say, I wouldn't call that a loan because Senator Barnett Ellis is my good colleague and she gave me the money and she said, don't sweat it. You have the, just whenever. So I might not decide to call it a loan, but if I have to give it back, that's still hanging over my head as a debt in my mind. That's how I operate in terms of my finances. Now, of course, I don't have the acumen of the good Minister Alcides, and so perhaps I don't understand fully that if someone gives me money and I need to give it back at some point under whatever terms, that's a loan. I do give in to the senior man, and so perhaps that's something else. Maybe that's not a loan. But in my mind, if someone gives you something and they say, don't worry about that, then that's a gift. If they give it to you and you got to give it back, that's a loan. But that's only from my, minimal understanding of finance, Madam President. I'm no esteemed financial expert. And so, Madam President, when this happened, the opposition realized that something was amiss. And every time they came close in that other place to trying to deal with it, the government would adjust its stance accordingly. But the unmistakable truth is this. The New Day government was not authorized to draw down and use special drawing rights without due authorization. The IMF guide notes require that member states follow their own domestic law in making use of the SDRs. And I'm very happy that the good minister brought up some key facts, and that's true. The IMF gave it to us. Other countries use it for what they may. It's ours to access. All of that is good points. The reality is that we need to do that within the parameters of our local laws. And it's just that simple. And this action that took place by the government in December last was not within the parameters of our local laws. And so what we're doing now is coming on the back end and saying, okay, And I like how they put it. The one thing I could say is that these are very artful negotiators and debaters we have here today, right? So I really very clever indeed. So I like how they put it. They say, we don't really agree that it was against the law, but since that's what central bank thinks, what we'll do is we'll amend the law to please them. Now, give me a break, Madam President. You really think that this government here, if they truly believe that their hands were clean, Madam President, clean like Pontius Pilate's on, that they would really bring this amendment before us here today? I don't think so. But again, that's only my opinion. Okay? So here it is now. What I'm understanding is we're appeasing the central bank today because it's a difference of opinion. So what we did is we went with the opinion we got and not the international lawyers who advise the central bank. We decided to go with the opinions we got. And now what we'll do is we'll just fix the law to accommodate the difference of opinion from the others. But, Madam President, and it was so urgent that they couldn't come before the Parliament ahead of time and get it all sorted out. They had to go do what they had to do, then come before the Parliament, and then make it retroactive. But then the laws we need to make retroactive to really help the people, we ain't backdating them. We very selectively making things retroactive. So, Madam President, I don't buy it. And I hear it. And I have to admit, like I did, it's a good argument. The mover and seconder did an exceptional job. I just personally don't buy it. My eyes are wide open. I'm wide awake. I'm listening in on the behalf of the Bahamian people, and I just don't buy it. But I have to tell you, if it was to be bought, they definitely set it out. They set it out nicely here today. They set it out nicely, Madam President. And so, like I said, the IMF guidance notes require that member states follow their own domestic law in making use of the SDRs. So it is therefore dependent upon the law enabling the government to use SDR. And this transaction then is illegal until Parliament changes the law, which will obviously happen here shortly, as we know that the government is the majority in this and the other place. But we cannot support it. We cannot support it. If we're going down on any side of history, it's on the side of the central bank and their attorneys. Madam President, the leader of the opposition wrote to the Prime Minister and the governor of the central bank at the end of December and referred to these same guidance notes and the memorandum of understanding that the Prime Minister had laid in the lower house. And the Prime Minister's response indicated that this is not a loan, but rather a liability. And, you know, Madam President, again, you know, and this is really a special day here today for me. Because I'm going to pause again to commend this New Day government. And I'll tell you why. Once their leader speaks, you could almost predict what everyone else is going to say. Okay? You know, maybe not all the time, but most of the time. And so here it is now. And there are those courageous ones. There are those courageous ones, I have to say, who sometimes speak their mind. And I have the utmost respect for, you know, many people in the House, people like Engliston and others. But the reality is that, you know, the Prime Minister said that this is not a loan. And that's all you could hear. This is not a loan, this is not a loan, this is not a loan, this is not a loan. And I'll tell you, when the Prime Minister speaks, they often say what he says. When the Prime Minister does not speak, then, you know, silence is what we hear. And so, Madam President, the reality is that, you know, in my estimation, Madam President, that the government entered into this arrangement with Central Bank, and it wasn't detailed in the debt management strategy, right? The purpose wasn't disclosed, and it's coming from a government. They claim that everything was functioning perfectly, and we're ahead of revenue projections, but yet we're drawing down on these reserves being held by the Central Bank. You know, the last administration paid to the time limit, the 91 days set out for loan borrowing, okay? And this government has a liability that's not a loan lasting throughout the year. Madam President, it breaches both the ceiling and timeline applicable to the use of SDRs, okay? And the reality is that they have to be aware of it. And I still believe that that is why we are here today. So, Madam President, again, I cannot support this amendment, the Central Bank Act that's before us today. And what I will say, Madam President, and I really want to go on the public record, is that if anyone in the New Day government wants to just decide that they want to give me some of their personal funds, we won't call it a loan, Madam President. We won't call it a loan. I just tell you all how much I need. We probably call it a liability, okay, a liability. But I am open to taking it, and, you know, we'll just call it a liability. It won't be a loan. And as such, you know, I don't know whether or not I'll pay it back or not, because really and truly, I don't understand in terms of the use of the word for you all what you consider a liability. But again, Madam President, if someone gives me something and they don't want it back, I say it's a gift. If someone gives me something and they want it back, I say it's a loan. And we cannot get a loan that's in contravention of local law, regardless of the IMF. And so here we are to fix the problem that they know that they created. They broke the law, breached the law, and now let's fix it. As such, I cannot support this, Madam President.
Thank you, Senator Maxine Seymour, for your contribution. As many, the chair recognizes Senator the Honorable James Roll Turner.
Once again, it is a pleasure to be in these honorable chambers amidst a number of the country's finest citizens and ladies and gentlemen who are usually prepared to contend for decency, fair play, and justice for all. Madam President, just before I really get started, I want to speak with you just for a moment about a young man that passed away yesterday by the name of Ricardo McPhee. I've been associated with him for several years because he worked with the same group that I led, JAGS International, for a number of years. About 10 years ago, the organization decided that there should always be a place for individuals with disabilities. And Ricardo was a double amputee, also doing dialysis. He was with us for several years, but he passed away yesterday. So I want to certainly extend my condolences to his mother, his sister, and to his colleagues that worked with him, because he was certainly someone that was loved by all. He will be sorely missed. But I also ought to tell you, Madam President, that lately I have found myself being concerned a bit more than usual with a few of the comments and elements of pageantry that that I see taking place in the media and certain special interest gatherings. From what I can remember, I have always felt that certain things, such as integrity, decency, honor, even poverty and wealth, ought not to be associated with politics, not to be associated with political affiliation. Now, I know there are those who may say, well, this is idealistic, but I take the opportunity to remind them and remind others that the greatest ideas, the greatest national achievements of this country really began with an idealistic position and an unwavering commitment to an ideal. Beyond what I just mentioned, integrity, honor, wealth, even poverty, I also want to add matters such as gender aggression and all such associated things with it to that list. The reality is that gender violence in any of its relative acts, and even the opposite side of pleasantries associated with opportunity met by preparation, should have nothing to do with political affiliation. In fact, it would be nothing more than shallow acts of political ploy if I were to adorn gold attire and sat before a camera suggesting I now have a concern. One should ask, where was your concern when these acts were happening before? Were you forbidden to advance for justice before, or does justice only seem present when it is convenient for some other side? Woe unto me if I should be available for such a day, Madam President. The last time I checked, injustice, wrong, dishonor had no affiliate color and resides in no specific neighborhood or fraternal grouping. As such, Madam President, I pray that the day always exists when we should all allow the law to take its course, evaluate these things, and pending the final advice, we can form an opinion, an educated and well-informed opinion that sees no affiliation or associated with any favor or prejudice, just justice. I'm a Bahamian man, and I mean that today in 100% of those words. When we must fight for a cause, I am prepared to do so. When I must be sad, I am not ashamed to be so. When I must help, I am prepared to do so. But I must admit that I have no desire at this time to encourage or be a perpetrator of vigilante justice that could advance from the words of one's mouth. We have a
Sorry to interrupt you, Senator Roll Turner, but there is an intervention on the floor.
Thank you, Madam.
Chair recognizes Senator the Honorable Maxine.
Thank you, Madam President. So I
What is your point of order, please?
in terms of imputation of character and the good senator's comments on partisan address of certain issues. I want to state clearly on the record that as a member of the Free National Movement, we have stood for many years against any act of violence, especially those against women. In recent times, there has been an increase in domestic violence, reported domestic violence and statistics when it comes to rape, violence, and everything else. And so the reality is that we took a lot of firsts in terms of creating the Department of Gender Affairs, the Office of the Spouse of the Prime Minister, and many other things. And so this is no convenience for us. This is who we are. So I just want to make that
what
clear.
What is your point of, what is the,
Improper imputation, Madam President, because the senator made comments that would suggest that acts that were recently public outcries, and he wasn't direct, but he made it clear that, that it seemed to be that, we were insincere, disingenuous, or just trying to leverage a situation because of partisanship. And I just want to make clear that that is not who we are.
Thank you. Thank you. Please proceed, Senator
Thank you.
Roll Turner.
We again have a collective responsibility to be careful. Now, Madam President, I want to shift gears and get into this thing here. In the past, I have stood firm and quite proud on a number of occasions for matters related to my beloved Bahama land, but most recently, not as proud as I stood as I watched the darlings of this nation perform with splendor and excellence, and a heart so strong with fortitude as I saw their outstanding performances of these young Bahamians during the 2023 Carifta Games. Today I want to join and thank those who came before me and congratulate these young athletes. This past Saturday on Grand Bahama, The Ministry of Grand Bahama hosted our athletes and parents to a cocktail reception to express our island's gratitude. I got to tell you that I saw youngsters and parents beaming with pride and eyes so filled with optimism because of their varied success. I say thanks to the Minister of Grand Bahama, Minister Moxie, her staff, those members, those from the Ministry of Youth, Sports and Culture and their teams, including the presence of the Honorable Senator Kirkland Russell, who was also present to show our youngsters that we love them and we support them. Certainly from swimming to track and field, these newest athletic stars deserve our admiration. And I say to corporate Bahamas, they certainly also deserve our financial support for their continued success. Madam President, we also saw that our nation celebrated the official launch of sailing as our national sport. Another set of progress in the right direction, in my opinion. I know that there are mariners, even in this room, primarily those associated with motorized luxury marine vessels. However, with the re-emergence of sailing, I shall now only hope that these very same captains and astute deep-sea fishermen in our midst develop their new skills that must now be associated with our national sport of sailing, a non-motorized sport. Madam President, the Central Bank of the Bahamas Amendment Bill 2023. The truth be told, the Bahamas is a country that is certainly showing signs of maturity at the young age of 50 years old. We all know that as we progress and with the evolution of technology and various financial instruments, there is a need to update, change, and resolve various issues as our country's needs change periodically. We have heard among our general public, and even in these honorable chambers on numerous occasions, the sentiments that there are numerous things that will require adjustments. Today is no different. Clearly in the past, there seemed to be an appetite, there seemed not to be an appetite to always make adjustments as required. What we have witnessed from this current administrative group so far is a desire, a will, and the intelligence to review and adjust what is necessary. Every Bahamian should always expect their lawmakers to move forward when an important step toward the appropriate use of international financial instruments is necessary to ensure the sound fiscal health of our nation. Even as we look at banking, what is happening in the industry in our country, we know that sooner or later we must review what is best for our citizens and their ability to conduct their transactions unhindered. The rising bank fees, absence of personal service when really needed, and even the fast-paced intention to seemingly manage everything remotely to the distress of the customer must soon be addressed at some point. If we are to build an all-inclusive society founded on correct principles associated with justice and opportunity, we must be led by God, yes, and allow honor to be associated with our character. If an adjustment is required to ensure the stability of our country, then every lawmaker and his or her associate should be at the ready to do so. No Bahamian should ever be disadvantaged because someone is afraid to remedy a wrong or fix that which is required for the national financial advantage and this country's well-being. Madam President, I stand ready, willing, and able to help the Bahamian people and this land that I love. As such, Madam President, I am pleased to support the Central Bank of the Bahamas Amendment Bill 2023.
Thank you for your contribution, Senator the Honorable James Turner. As many, the chair recognizes Senator the Honorable Reuben Raming.
grave concern as relate to the matter of crime. And indeed, my senator for Grand Bahama, we feel the same way about, in particular, matters relating to violence against women. That has always been a matter very, very close with me. For years, I've had a unique and somewhat unpleasant experience of counseling on many occasions women who have been victim of abuse of all kinds. Even in your family, you have had to deal with matters even against violence against women and rape. I remember growing up seeing in communities incest, from a child, and you begin to realize what it was later on as you mature, and these things become formulated in your mind. I've seen the abuse of power against young women who took jobs that they desperately needed and then find themselves at the disadvantage of manipulative bosses who leverage their necessity for work against them, forcing them, and in many instances, even the principal ones have been physically forced. I'm actually personally thinking about a specific incident even now in my mind. And to see the things that has been happening to women for some time. While I'm at it, the issue of marital rape has been swirling. And would you believe it? I don't believe in marital rape. Because what I see marriage to be is a relationship where a man is willing to die for his wife. I just don't believe in it. I don't believe that a man would put aside a temporary need or temporary urge, put that above the care of a wife that he has to die for and provide for. A woman that is always on his side, whether she's sick or not, she will always be there for something temporary that could wait for another day or another week or until the illness is over. I can't fathom it, but I don't believe it. But I do believe that mankind is imperfect. And it is sad that we have to get to that point because of the devious nature of those who don't believe in truly what marriage is. And truly the value and the necessity for life of womanhood. So much so that Adam could not stand alone. There would be no world, there would be no us. That men and women are uniquely important to every aspect of life and life itself. That we would have get to the point and begin to see even now more visibly through the cries of women that there are those pathetic men who actually abuse women, create lifelong scars for momentary pleasure and momentary one-sided pleasure at that. And so you find yourself having to support out of care for those who have been abused, neglected, and who are suffering, something that goes against even my personal nature. It's sad that we have to get to that point. And then recently, I heard some pronouncements that I thought set back the fight for marriage, for the marital rape agenda. Because in the heart of every man, even us who support it, has always been the possibility of abuse against the man. When it's time for me to get rid of him, well, I could just, that's always a legitimate fear. Make an accusation that is not false, that is false. That is one of the greatest concern I think that most men have, that that they don't want to find themselves because of anger or spite or so that somebody use the tool that is designed to protect the downtrodden and the victims as an opportunity to get the house or jail the man or get a swift divorce, and the abuse is very, very high up in the mindset of men. Beforehand, and even in this place and other places, I would have spoke many times about even my concern about accusations. And you find that accusations many times are so hard to prove, and when things come up, that's why I believe in the process of law. When things were to come up, people's lives are ruined. They'll write all articles, and you'll be on the front page of every newspaper when you're accused, and when you're acquitted, there may be a byline somewhere. And yet, despite the lawful acquittal, you still run around with a label. Or sometimes in a situation where the accuser is literally blatantly found to be lying, there seems to be no justice. So you could imagine the pain and the fear I had in my mind and in my heart when even recent allegations that was circulating around the press, and I get concerned just saying, let justice fall and justice be. When it was stated, and I was devastated by that, when it was actually stated by a seasoned individual that persons who would have made accusations against rape would have withdrawn a matter, and it was not so. Because the instant I heard that, I believed it, that, what? And I got offended because I saying, you mean you can ruin somebody's life on something, because if it happened, you got to carry it. And then later on, I can't use the word please because there's no pleasing in any part of this. There's no pleasing in any part of it. I say it again, there's no pleasing in any part of rape. The victim, I even pity the perpetrator. I pity him. The accused, there's no pleasing in any event, but there was a degree of satisfaction when the voice later on came that, no, I'm strong. I want us to be very careful on everything that we say. We cannot interfere with matters. We cannot speak matters that you don't know factually in these cases, because these are sensitive cases. And Madam President, quite frankly, I believe an apology is due. Because in my mind, that's just a pure statement of that setback, a whole matter. I noticed, because I've been impacted with the grief as it relates to persons being raped, and I've seen it and witnessed it across the board. And we got to be disciplined. The thing about the law is, it ain't really about you, it's always about me. You know why? Because if I don't give you all your rights under the law, should I be in the situation, I can't have all my rights. I'll use an example that may seem odd. I remember Samuel Natty Knowles, who I hold no brief for, a drug lord, and we know what drugs have done to so many of our children. But I was offended when he had one more motion, which I would have said myself, he could lose that. But he had one more application that he could have put before the court, and he was whisked away. I had a problem with that, because if it was my son before the courts, I would like for him to be able to acquit himself or access every possible avenue of adjudication. What I'm simply saying that the law is always supposed to be not only blind, but very, very unbiased. And we all have a duty of care as not only as legislators, but even being citizens. In passing gossip and all these other things that is unfounded just because it's popular don't make it true. That's why we have the court of law. We are disadvantaging the persons going before justice when we state things as facts that aren't founded in and of themselves. We have a duty of care towards each other. The same way if God forbid, a family member of mine was slaughtered on the street, I don't want to see the pictures over social media. The same way you would not like it. Would you believe I've been there present on many occasions when persons were literally murdered in my eyesight? And to help with it, I quickly grabbed my phone because I saw the car speeding away. You know, one time right on the highway, coming across, I saw the man got shot. I grabbed it. I said, we got to identify the license plate, bam, 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 bam. And I used it to record. And the only person who saw that, this person bleeding out and hoping that I caught the plate of the car as he went across the medium and everything else. And I went straight to the police and I showed it to them. Nobody saw it. I didn't even share it with my wife. The blood trail, the person came with a yellow welder through the thing and come there and died right there on the sidewalk. There are times we had Kiwanis functions on Foxhill Park, rat-a-tat-tat, people getting shot. And I could feel the warm bullet migrated from here down to the groin of the young man, and you can touch it on their skin, and it's still warm, and the lady shot in the arm. We've been all over these things, the violence on the Foxhill Parade. Man, we need to take these things very, very seriously. For true justice to be a fact, guilt be established, and then that person be dealt with fully according to the law. I'll end there lest I go to the point of the matter of concern about bail and all these other matters and so on and so forth. Actually, right now, quite frankly, bail is a matter of life and death even for the assailant. Because persons incarcerated are wards of the state and they have a duty of care towards them. So if you feel that a person is a threat unto themselves before justice is adjudicated, I think we have a duty as a country to secure those persons, if only for their own sake, and also most likely because of the victim. And in that vein, we've seen also how many victims have been intimidated. We've seen that many times. And the most guilty get away because assailants are let go on bail and they're able to intimidate notwithstanding court orders. Or they have access to cell phones and different type things would allow them to put out hits even from jail and et cetera, et cetera. So we do have a problem in our execution of laws. To this bill, Madam President, this too, in a sense, is akin to that from an example perspective. If I were to summarize it in one simple tune, that if you literally hold the power to do what you can, according to the procedures that is laid out, there's no excuse at all in not following the procedures beforehand. Let me give you an example. If the government needed to borrow monies from central bank, that's their prerogative. And I'm going to come back to why I stick with the word borrow, notwithstanding what Senator Alcides and others said. That's your prerogative. But if there was in the law, and Senator Alcides himself said that there are persons who disagree that the process that was taken was correct and it should be done another way, he supported the way it was taken. Well, the mere fact that, nevertheless, this bill is here to still address that, for what you call the avoidance of doubt, as you call the avoidance of doubt, if you are right, there's no need to appease avoidance of doubt. If there was doubt, you should have gone about it in the best. No, when there is doubt, you err on the side of caution and do it right the first time. Because government is the one that also sets the tone, just as parents sets the tone for children. You can't tell your children to stop cussing when every time you drop a fork or a spoon, you cuss him out, cuss little Johnny out. And when you see little Johnny on the street cussing like a wild dog sailor, you get mad and slap him in the mouth and wonder where he get it from. You should slap yourself in the mouth. We cannot, a government cannot repeatedly and repetitively and almost consistently as it would have been done and accused of being done, choose to use their power that they can always solve with a stroke of the pen and a resolution in both houses do things that are either contrary or perceived to be contrary to the law when they can always keep the reputation of our Commonwealth clear and clean just by ensuring that they clear up all ambiguities. What is unreasonable about that? See, that's almost like the rape thing. If you're in doubt that the woman say no, stop anyway. You can't say, I doubt you say no, rape the woman, and later on say to her, sorry, I thought. No, the same thing translates to that. If you are in doubt, confirm. If you are in doubt, as you said about this legislation, and the reason why we bring this legislation here to clear up all doubt, if you are in doubt, stop and get it right. That is simple. That everything applies to life. Trust me, everything applies to life. If you are in doubt, stop. No, we are turning to any crime, anything that goes. If you are in doubt, stop. Because if you do proceed, you must make sure that you are. And the mere fact of that, if this was not in doubt, then when you would have corrected, make these amendments, all does not directly pertain to the actual cost that was taken. There were some that I thought was pretty okay. You know, you're going to reduce the amount that you could actually borrow from by 50%. Some may look at it saying, well, you put something extra sweet in there, but that is positive, and I'm going to explain why. But if you do have doubt in something and you know it's going to be, the matter is going to arise, you need to address it. What if we keep passing laws in this country that we have doubts about, and every time we reach to a court, the court has to shut it down because it's unconstitutional? That will make us lousy lawmakers. We are to check ahead of time to be able to make sure that the laws we pass is constitutional, because no law is above the Constitution. It's the same principle. No sexual advance towards a woman is above yes or no. Her Constitution is her right to say no. So if you even perceived by action or drunkenness, which is no, she may be drunk and telling you all kinds of things. In my opinion, that's no. Because no, I'm showing you that it's the same thing. We have a constitution. Human beings have a constitution. The constitution of the human being, even God respect, is the right to choose. It's the right to choose. The same way any law that we pass in any place, we weigh it against the Constitution. That's the very same reason why we had the law reform bill in this house yesterday, or earlier this week. It's because we realized that there would have been, and there are likely, and there would have been experienced some errors in our laws, not just in handling in terms of their unwieldiness and their wording, but where there are errors in law, we will bring them back here where the law contradicts itself and make correction. And my question to the AG then, that day, as it relates to the victims of those law amendments, himself agreed that we will have to make them whole. And he gave examples of how laws in the banking systems and other points, that in the law that was improperly drafted, or in the law where there was an error or a misplaced comma, could cause someone to not to have the intended justice of this legislative body. So we can't come and split the baby this way and that way, one law for you, one law for me. The mere fact that you admit that there is doubt in that area, and you're here now correcting and going retroactively back to the action, means that there is a direct cover-up to ensure that it's suited with the law. And when we stand here and use the IMF as the backbone for the actions here, where the IMF in and of itself made recommendation that all IMF countries must comply with, they themselves yield to the local law. So if at that time the local law did not allow it, and the IMF is saying you can do this if the local law allow it, we could have come and called an emergency session in the House of Assembly and in the Senate, and in under 1 week, probably even in 3 days, make the law clear so that you could have done what you wanted to do. Then the statement was made by Senator Pistock that the central bank governor said that they are, make sure I get you correctly, that they are working with the government. What did you say? Sorry about that. Sorry about that. You did, Senator Lightborn. that the central bank governor made a statement that he is working with the government. Did I get it correct? Take a moment and find it if you need to. No, I'm asking you out of respect to get your quote right. Good.
You know, you have to address.
So if that is the case, that doesn't apply anything other than if your boss speak and you give your recommendation as he did to the Free National Movement government when in August the latitude was given for this money deposit to be used for the purpose of COVID, the same central bank governor informed that our administration that it could not have been used in the manner in which it's being used now. So now if the leader of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas, who is in charge of finances, come to this governor of central bank, despite his role, and he said, this is my advice, and he said, this is what I want to do. He said, okay, suffer it to be so. You know, in many instances, you know, the best thing you can do, even as permanent secretaries or anyone else, when the minister wants to do something that is awry, you make the note in the record. I was directed. So don't come and say that was something else, and then we stand here telling the Bahamian people that is not borrowing at all, and we sticking to that, sticking to my gun. Well, I've never seen somebody paid interest on a gift. I don't care how low the interest is. Oh, it's my money, so I can do what I want, then why have to ask permission and why are we coming through all this? Quite frankly, we're going to get to who that money is in the reserve of the central bank. Remember, every government is just but a caretaking government. And if it was actually government money, it would be in the consolidated fund. That's the money that y'all can spend however you want, well, according to the budgets that's been passed in this House. Unlike what happened with the Minister of Housing and the Minister of Housing and the $20 million that should have come to this House for ratification before it's actually spent, because our purview don't allow that latitude to take on just governmental burdens. You see, can't take on governmental burdens. And so here it is now. Senator Alcides is clearly sitting here and stating repeatedly and with emphasis that this is not a loan. But yet I sit right here and I look in this bill, and in this bill, why do I see the word loan? I thought I marked it when I see it. Yeah. On 3, the amendments of Section 21 of the Principal Act said the amount of the loans which may be outstanding at any one time shall not exceed the aggregate 15.5% of the average of the ordinary revenue of the government. Blah, 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 blah. Let's speak about something like this. So, I mean, you can't say it's a loan, and the document mentioned loan. I think it mentioned also the word borrowing, maybe
Yes,
out of context. You can clarify.
Yes, if the member yields.
Chair recognizes Senator the Honorable
Yes,
Michael Alcides.
yes, Madam President, the section to which the member honorable senator refers is Section 21, which deals with another matter, not directly with the issue addressing the SDRs. That matter deals with the borrowing limits of the government, that the government, the limit of the amount of funds that the government can borrow from the central bank. We're reducing it from 30% to 15.5%. What had happened, Madam President, is, and I can say that because the question did rise, I'll be quick, that, you know, why didn't we come earlier? Because we were coming to just amend that particular portion to remove, for the removal of doubt. And then there were these other amendments that came up having to do with the limits, and as well as central bank participation in the primary markets. And so we decided, instead of coming to do one and then coming back again, we'll just consolidate all of it. So the short answer is it mentions loan, because that is a separate amendment dealing with the reduction in the limit from 30% to 15%, not directly related to the issue of the SDR, which is dealt with in the amendment at Section 17.
Thank you for your
My question
clarification.
is, thank you very much.
Wait, just
Do that.
No, just allow the chair to recognize you again, Senator Raming. I understand you're in a hurry, but you have your allotted time. Please proceed, Senator Raming.
Yeah. To that point, as Senator Alcides would have stated, which I looked at beforehand, my question would be, as it relates to the borrowing, the funds that was undertaken from the government, does that reduction from 30 to 15% restricts the percentage rate of borrowing as related to similar transactions in the future?
Yes, for advances in the future.
Chair.
Yes, thank you, Madam President. For advances from the central bank going forward, the limit of the government would be 15.5% of the estimated average revenue, or the actual average revenue. So whatever the average revenue of the government is, I think they normally take 3 years worth of average revenue. The maximum amount that the central bank can lend to the government going forward will be 15% as opposed to now 30%.
Thank you, Senator Halkitis. The chair recognizes Senator Ruben
And that
Ramey.
is my case in point as to rate the fish fry fish. It's a loan in relation to the context of the percentage rate that can actually be borrowed. The percentage rate that actually which can be borrowed is related to the amount of money similar to the same transaction that is done, which the government could get from central bank. So in a sense, it's the exact same thing. Okay. All right. Let's keep moving on. Let's keep moving on. When our people look at this central bank and our reserves, let's talk really about ownership and this reserve. We all know what government is. You know, they say government own all the crown land and everything else, so on and so forth. But when you track it down to its actual roots, it's really the Bahamians people own, not necessarily government own. They are caretakers. And I think it's fair for us to appreciate and understand that what is government owned is what's in the consolidated fund. And it's what they own, and that ownership comes from the empowerment of Parliament through the process of the budget, which they estimate that they need, any government would need X amount for its functioning, and that amount is transferred over to the public treasury, the public purse, and the government can do what it needs to do. Even in emergency, reallocate and transfer. But if they want to exceed that, they got to come back to the place again, and they need to seek that extension for additional borrowing and everything else. However, as it relates to central bank, I want our Bahamian people to understand why that debt reserve there is on the whole. The whole value of our Bahamian dollar is in and of itself, it is pegged against those very same reserves. All right? We are a country of about 250,000 adults. Let's not count the children in this. We got about 250,000 adults. So it's really 250,000 people that, you know, the working class, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so in and of itself, as it relates to the Bahamian dollar, pound per pound, person per person, we are blessed that our dollar exceeds the value of that of Jamaica, who has millions, or Haiti that have millions. I want us to appreciate God's blessings on us. But our brilliant strategy that has been put in place is that we keep a reserve that is able to back our dollar and our dollar issuance one for one, and therefore we can keep it in par with the US dollar. So those reserves are very, very critical. I commend even the previous government that despite 75% collapse in our tourism product during the time of COVID and the shock throughout the whole world, our reserves at that time was the highest in history at that time. So that meant that the former administration kept this country's fundamentals strong, even though the things beyond our control was bearing down on us, from Dorian to COVID to the international shutdown, yet the fundamentals of this country were so strong. That is proven so much so that less than 3 months after September, October, November, December, 3 months after the September election loss, the projections, the reports that was given, the quality review that was given by this administration, acknowledge that the country had a surplus in revenue, I think in excess of $90 million odd dollars in its overall projection. But I want our Bahamian people to understand how important this is. First of all, the debt reserves that you see there, the probably 2-point-odd billion that is there now, is not a true number of its liquidity that is available. Why I want us to appreciate that is, the reason why that reserve is there is that whenever the government gives guarantees for all these corporations, BEC and all them other stuff, them hundreds of millions of dollars back guarantee, that segregates a chunk of our reserve in the corner. So say, for instance, we had $100 worth of reserve in U.S. We have $100 Bahamian so out of there, and BPL needs to get a $10 loan. Central bank have to separate $10,000 U.S. currency, bam, and set that aside. That even though it shows on the books, it can't be counted in the aggregate. Why am I saying that is, when we look at all the other debts that the government backs and carries, the only reason that's standing strong is because we have the equivalent to reinforce it in reserves in our central bank. So the number you see in itself is a little less than what you really think it is, even though it's there. When we look at the central bank, apart from that transaction and interaction with government, the next, and I think the first primary use of the reserve is to protect the Bahamian people and the merchants class. Because that's what guarantee our dollars, our credit cards, our purchasing power all around and wherever else we need to go, our ability to make and exchange money throughout the world, the United States, pay our credit card bills, because they don't take Bahamian dollars. I mean, we've been going to Miami so much that there's some people, places in Miami, they'll take our dollar because it's respected. They know they're going to get one for one for it. But you can't go to Switzerland and spend it. But because of the reserve that we have here, we're able to purchase all the goods that come in. And quite frankly, if you look at it from as of December of last year, 2022, our reserve stood at having the capacity to sustain the imports to this country for about 34 weeks. So as big as that number seems, it ain't all that big when you look at the regular functioning of it. So we need to take care when we do anything unnecessary and not to be so flippant, and I'm not implying that the action was taken was flippant. I'm talking generally, not to be flippant in accessing anything that puts a draw or hold on any portion of our reserve. Because that is very, very critical in terms of us being able to operate and function and keep our economy going. And you know, when we look at these matters of the interest rates, and I heard the boasting about the interest rate instead of the 3% versus the 10.11%, et cetera, and the borrowing power and the brilliant strategies that will help us with the interest rate. And even back to my good senator here who tried to quote me on my statements as relate to the FS, which I don't deny in its context. You know, I want us to understand something, you know. The reason why we are in the hell straits that we are in right now as a country, that has caused us to have the struggles and the high interest rate on the open market to do business, is clearly tracked right back down to the Perry Christie administration. When you look at that during that time, the Bahamas, that they introduced, and I said before, and because you made the statement about the financial secretary, then the financial secretary was Simon Wilson. Michael Alcides was doing the same thing he did right back then. Brave Davis was prime minister. Brave Davis was deputy prime minister. Perry Christie, the Honorable Perry Christie was prime minister. Brave Davis was deputy prime minister. So basically the same crew that is there then was there now. The Bahamas sovereign debt rating was pretty good. But in that 5 years of that administration alone, virtually, absolutely none of their budget projections were actually met. There were times in which the Bahamas growth was minus 1% in terms of GDP growth. We saw the introduction of the Bahamian people sovereign debt rating would cause us to have difficulty in borrowing on the international market at reasonable rates. We're being hit with these high interest rates now, 9, possibly up to 11% now, simply because it was the then Perry Christie administration that put the country in junk status, that introduced us to junk status. And it was Simon Wilson was then, again, the financial secretary, Minister Alcides, Deputy Prime Minister Brave Davis, and also Prairie Christie Prime Minister. So much so that every single year of that administration, we got downgraded every single year. We went through COVID and didn't get a downgrade till after election. That I can recall. I stand to be corrected. The whole country shut down. And not only that, the VAT was introduced during that time, and it was boasted of being the most successful VAT launch in this region. And we raised close to over $1 billion in VAT during that time, and still the country went to junk status. Sometimes in life is sure, throwing money at a problem don't always fix it. And now we see ourselves back to in the same state, in the same condition. My concern about central bank is to ensure that central bank does not receive the appreciation and treatment that national insurance is getting. National insurance has always been looked at as a slush fund for government, whereas they can use it. And I hope this act does not become an act that opens the door. And I would say, just like how the Removable Property Act did a good thing then, but needs to be shut down, in my opinion. It had its life. It did its purpose. We should have shut it back down, because I'm sick and tired of foreigners coming in here and owning too much. It was done under Prime Minister Ingram. It was done for a good reason. Bahamas did a good thing. Atlantis did a good thing, but brother, by now that should have been shut back down, because I think it's now operating to the disadvantage of us as Bahamian people. So now I don't want to see central bank, by virtue of this act being passed and the things that it allows, even with the acquiescence of the IMF, turning it into the state, especially under the mindset of this current administration towards NIB, seeing it moving off the cliff of insolvency, and yet today we can't get a definitive answer of rescuing one of the most solid safety nets for our country's people, which has been established by the PLP, is looking like it's going to die under PLP, notwithstanding that the erosion began from even during the times of Prime Minister Ingram, where corrections was made. But even now, we're not seeing correction made. And the only thing I remember hearing was, we don't want to put that burden on the people. If national insurance crash, the burden far exceeds the couple percentage they're asking to do to save the thing. So if that same mentality applies to this central bank procedure, and it becomes more easily and readily accessible by any government, I have a personal concern. Because most of the government would be different, and they talk all the rally talk, but sometimes when I look at it, sometimes I see the operation, when you set a precedent, the next one follow it. Sometimes it's best not to set the precedent, especially in law. Especially in law. And I see that in VAT. Even though we hated VAT, guess what? Because it was already law, you was constrained to, you have to use that which was there. So with that, in review of all this and what I said, I stand with my colleagues in this one as it relates to this. It will be passed. This will pass, but it won't pass with my blessing. It will pass with my personal one-man statement, revolt and review and expression of my concern on the record. And I pray God bless the Commonwealth of the Bahamas, not because of, in this instance, in spite of.
Chair recognized. Thank you, Senator the Honorable Reuben Ramming, for your contribution. As many?
Thank you, Madam President. I want to thank senators for their contributions. Madam President, this is a convenient time to take the luncheon suspension, so I move that the business of the Senate do suspend until 3 p.m. this afternoon.
Is there a seconder? It has been moved and seconded that the business of the Senate is suspended until 3 p.m. this afternoon. As many as in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say nay. The ayes have it. The motion is carried. The business of the Senate is suspended until 3 p.m. April 27, 2023.
if there are any other viable options, Madam Speaker. Just then, this individual can sign on to Amazon.com and see a phone of equal or perhaps even greater value, Madam Speaker, for only $395, Madam Speaker.